What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we are here with some Lions news updates early in the week, heading into future weeks. But also, as the trade deadline continues to approach us, I wanted to make another video talking about another few options that maybe we haven't given that much attention to that could potentially be on the Lions' radar as we get to this trade deadline for some more edge rusher help. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with another Lions latest video. I want to make this video kind of similar to last night's or Monday's, where we discussed Carl Granderson and talked about that potential option for the Lions, where it's not a full-on deep dive breakdown, but we do show some clips. I talk about my early impressions from having watched the player and maybe discuss why it makes sense or why it doesn't make sense. And today, I have a completely new name that we have not talked about yet, and I have another player, so it's actually technically two today, that we have discussed over here on this channel on a live stream with Speakeasy when we talked about potential trade options for the Lions. And that was the one player that I brought to the table with video clips of already. And he caught my eye before going live and doing that stream as someone that I thought would be interesting. And then this past week, he had arguably his best game, at least statistically, against us in their blowout loss for the Tennessee Titans. So now I think he's kind of more on everybody's radar after that game if you didn't already know about him. So I thought we'd at least bring him back up again in today's video and give him a little bit of a shout out as a potential option. But before we get into any of that, I do want to make it clear that on Monday, we did our first all-22 look at this last game. I gave a lot of shout outs to Muhammad in that game, who I thought played really well, 6 pressures. I do think that it must be brought up and it can't be forgotten in all of this trade speculation and who are the Lions going to go get, who may they be after in all of this, is that the Lions have gotten it done in the last few weeks. I do believe that they need to make a move. I do believe that they should go add some more help if the option and if the trade makes sense. I don't think they should do anything insane like, oh, go give up a first-round pick for just this guy that's kind of good. Don't do something crazy like that. Okay, there's no need to overspend right here. That being said, though, I do believe we need to add help, and I do believe they will add help. But we also should give credit to what the Lions have done without Hayden Hutchinson, the way that they found ways to win the last 2 weeks. And not as much the Minnesota game, but this last week in particular, we got to see a little bit of Thomas, who didn't really pop that much, but a guy like Muhammad played his butt off. And I think it's only fair that we give a guy like that a ton of credit, because we talk about all these guys that aren't here and what it could mean and why we need this guy and that guy. But last week, Muhammad showed up and was like, hey, I got some help for you guys. And he added 6 pressures, not against the best offensive line, a third-string right tackle, a left tackle that's a rookie, but he's been pretty good in J.C. Latham, but he did some work. So I think it's worth giving those guys credit for sure. We should not overlook the way those guys have performed and get too caught up in kind of the trade idea to the point where we're like, well, it doesn't really matter. Lions don't have anything right now. It's like, hey, they're still winning. They're still finding ways to win. I do think they will add help, and I do think they should add help, but they're finding ways to win. These guys they have brought over, like Muhammad specifically, have showed up, and we've seen guys, of course, rise to the occasion. Lee McNeil, since getting that extension, DJ Reader, Levi has done some things over the last few weeks. So I just want to give that some attention. If you want to see that more, check out the All-22 video. But now, with all that being said, let's dive into this one. Before we get to these trade ideas, I first just want to start off with the little news that we have. First off, Malcolm Rodriguez, he was carted off in our last game, but reportedly the Lions avoided a major injury like a high ankle sprain here with Malcolm Rodriguez, and instead he could return for Week 10 against the Texans. Not going to play this week, but he could return for Week 10 against the Texans after this Green Bay Packers game. That's a huge update there. Great to hear from Malcolm Rodriguez. Of course, without Derek Barnes, Trevor Nowatzki stepped up for it this past week, but getting Malcolm Rodriguez back is critical. He has been big time for us this season. He has a whole different element to his game that we love. We know how good of a tackler he is in space. He's also been a very nice coverage piece, and I feel like the Lions are starting to kind of lean into this year. And I think he's one of our best off-ball blitzing backers, maybe our best off-ball blitzing backer, depending on the day. Of course, be important to get him back. He's played like 38% of the defensive snaps for us this season. Of course, you can't ever overlook the special teams impact. Also, we have Christian Mahogany, who was full participation all week last week, that was on the NFI list for the Lions. He has now been activated off of the NFI list and to the active roster for the Lions. So there you go. Christian Mahogany is here as a Lion. Now, as a fan, I don't really know what this is going to look like in the NFL, and hopefully we don't have to see that and we stay healthy, but he is on the 53-man roster. So full participation. Lions must have felt good about it. Clearly, he was getting healthy because he was listed full participation over and over and over, and Christian Mahogany is now on the 53-man roster. So congratulations. Love to see the rookie at some point. Just hopefully when we do see the rookie, it's because we're blowing another team out and not because of injury. All right, that being said, let's now move into a couple of these trade ideas. So the first one is a brand new name. This would be a very different different type of trade where this would be a type of move where you probably don't have to give up much at all. Yesterday we talked about giving up more. Today talking about giving up much less, to the point where this could be like a 7th round comp pick, right? This could be a conditional 7th round pick for the Lions that they could give up to potentially acquire this player. But he's performed well. And the reason it wouldn't take very much is because he was signed during this season after being let go by the Las Vegas Raiders, who had an injury to Tyree Wilson. And if the Raiders are kind of selling off some of their pieces, maybe this is a guy that they would be willing to give up on. If they're not going to give up on Max Crosby, it all sounds like, and also probably their 1st round pick Tyree Wilson, a guy that maybe they would be willing to part ways with, and I think they would. I think they'd honestly take anything because they'd look at it as a plus. Like, hey, if we're selling anyway, we'll take literally anything you're willing to give because we just signed this guy as a free agent on a 1-year, $1.125 million deal, and that is Chaisson. I know, it's a crazy name, and I didn't think I'd ever get here, but I wanted to bring some variety to these videos and not talk about the same two guys. We've done a video on Za'Darius, we talked about Uche, yesterday we talked about Granderson, we talked about some guys on live streams, but Chaisson is an interesting option as a guy that you wouldn't have to give up probably much of anything for. However, I don't just do these videos based on production and looking at the numbers and I'm like, oh, he's cooking. Obviously, that's the guy. I watch these players. And today I went through and watched Chaisson, and he absolutely grabbed my attention. I didn't think he was perfect, but he grabbed my attention. We all know him as the former 1st round pick, played at LSU, wore the number 18 like Makai Wingo, which says a lot about the player. That also had the ACL injury back in college. He's missed some time in the NFL, but so far this season, now stepping in recently for the Las Vegas Raiders, 8 pressures on the year. The year before, he only had 14. He's got 8 pressures on the season with a game started. Haven't really followed his past like that. I will say this seemingly is so far his best stretch that he's had as an NFL player. He brings definitely that 1st round pick type of athleticism to the table that pops immediately. At 6'3", 245 pounds, when you see the clips, he's going to be number 44 in these clips with just over 32-inch arms, so he's not incredibly long. But when you see the athleticism and the way that he moves and some of the variety that he brings to the table, he looks like a 1st round pick. He looks like that kind of athlete on the field. Speed to power transition, which is incredibly smooth. He also brings real lean as a pass rusher as well, which can allow an ability to finish, some stop and start athleticism as well. He can kind of slide by blocks, create a little bit of slither as a pass rusher. I do think that his length is a plus. I don't think that is bad. I think he's got plus length considering his height. I really like within his first step or his get off, the distance and the depth that he can cover upfield, threat that he can pose, whether that's with the stop and start as a pass rusher and some of the ground that he can cover as a pass rusher. His footwork can be very threatening within his skip step that you will see on the edge. He's very effective at the top of the rush, and to me that comes back to some of the dip. A lot of success at being able to close the high side of an offensive tackle, that top shoulder, being able to collapse the pocket through the side shoulder of an offensive tackle in those spots. He has a really good ability to drop weight in the knees. He's able to bend at the knees and get under pads. You'll especially see this as a run defender, where arguably he's having his best season as a run defender by far. PFF has him graded out as a 73.8 against the run, and you'll see it. His ability to drop weight, sink under the pads, but also sit himself down as a run defender. Really nice pad level off the ball as well. Good discipline off the line of scrimmage. And going back to some of the kind of that bend and the sink that he carries in his game, you'll see how fast he can work through traffic. You'll see the suddenness. Still brings the hips to really create a cornering ability at the top of the pass rush. So he brings a nice little dynamic, and that's where you see some of the 1st round athleticism that he just kind of stands out a little bit as a mover in general. Allows him to really change pace and be threatening as a pass rusher, where it doesn't always feel the same. He can get very creative and a little bit nuanced with how he wants to work against an offensive tackle. You can also see that there's a visible pass rush plan. Now, the problem with that is I think it's a little bit less instinctual. I think it feels a little bit more kind of proactive, like, hey, I'm going to go to this, or I've played this offensive tackle, he was setting this way, I'm going to have this counter off it, I'm going to set it up and utilize it, rather than being incredibly instinctual. It feels like, where it's like, okay, I can kind of feel this and be more so reactive to what the offensive tackle does and taking advantage of how he sets on the play. It feels a little bit more kind of like pre-planned. That being said, though, it is nice to see a pass rush plan to win inside and outside. Doesn't play with a ton of false movement, which does allow him to create efficient inside wins. However, a couple of the knocks that I have, first off, would be with the hand timing as a pass rusher. This feels a little bit kind of wild. It feels a little bit all over the place in terms of utilizing his hands. You'll get some really clean reps where it's like, that's nice timing, it's tied well with his footwork, but then you'll also see other times where it just feels like he's kind of hand fighting with an offensive tackle and he's kind of all over the place. Get checked in his chest, kind of stall out a pass rush rep, and it just doesn't feel incredibly fluid or extremely well timed or instinctual. Times his long arm where he just kind of reaches it out way too early. He doesn't actually have a great entry angle at the point of attack against an offensive lineman to make that work. Now, with his movement skills, you do see a plenty of stunt usage because of his ability to cover ground laterally, move laterally. Oh, I don't think he brings like incredible power at the point of attack. I think a little bit more in the upper body. You don't get as much pop as maybe you would hope with Caleb Von Chaisson, and I think you'll see that especially in some of his walkback that really can stall out, but sometimes it doesn't even feel like he gets started because you don't get some of that initial like knockback pop or power at the point of attack. Maybe some of the lack of core strength there at times as well. Positioning against the run, back to the entry angles there, just getting himself settled down to be able to hold his ground, to be able to settle down into a gap that doesn't always feel very consistent. Oh, it seemingly has improved so far this season. You'll see it with kind of his spin counters where they feel like he's kind of just working himself in place where it looks sudden, it looks dynamic, but he doesn't really go anywhere on the plate. And I think you'll even see that with some of his lateral change direction where it doesn't look as smooth or as fluid as you would expect in terms of being able to create space. And it looks like he's a little bit out of control at times. It was a guy that absolutely popped me when watching. You know, I try to find guys that really like kind of stand out when I'm watching him, and he was one of those players because you see the athleticism that's there, you can see the willingness to step in and play the run, but you're also seeing now some of the production that's kind of coming along with it. You watch him against Kansas City, it didn't feel like they had any kind of answer. Now, obviously, the tackle situation for Kansas City is kind of a disaster, but they didn't seem to have any answer to deal with Caleb Von Chaisson in that game. To me, I think he actually brings some more upside in certain ways that he can win than some of these other pass rushers where maybe they're a little bit more polished in how they rush, but they don't bring as much to the table. So Caleb Von Chaisson has had a good season so far. He's only 25 years old. He's got that one-year deal. Again, if you're going to trade for a player like this, you don't give up more than a 6th-round pick. You give up probably like a 7th-round conditional pick, depending on how much he plays. But do the Lions feel like he'd move the needle enough? I'll be honest, based on what I've seen just alone with the Las Vegas Raiders, I think that you could say that, oh, he's an upgrade. He makes us better. But is the sample size there where you feel like it's worth making this kind of trade where you're like, for sure, he's going to give us this. He's going to show us this level of consistency where it actually makes sense as a standalone trade. That I'm not completely sure on for the Lions here. And plus the fact that he was available and obviously he went to the Raiders and say not the Lions at the time, different situation, but not the Lions at the time. Maybe the Lions don't have that much interest anyway, but I think it's a different idea that's on a different end of the spectrum in terms of like how much it would actually cost. So I want to throw that idea out there. The other idea is Arden Key. Now, this is a guy that we did talk about on the live stream. So we talked about this weeks ago, and then it just so happens that he popped against us on very limited pass rush snaps, 15. He had 4 pressures, a couple on Decker, and it was like, hold up. Who's this Arden Key guy? Well, Arden Key to me stood out when I watched the Tennessee Titans because, again, at that time I was just looking for guys that I thought made sense financially. You look at him, he had signed that 3-year deal. He kind of stepped into being a starter role this season, opposite of Harold Landry. I wouldn't say he's had an excellent season. However, on the season, 13 pressures, 3 sacks. He definitely has that finishing ability as a pass rusher. And financially speaking, according to Over the Cap, $1.9 million this season. Next season, it would be $7 million. 6'4.5", about 240 pounds. He's much more on the slender side, so he would be a very different pass rusher than what we have. Definitely not going to fill into the Pascal or the Levi role or as like a strong edge setter. That's really never been his game. He plays for some real force. He plays with plus energy, and I think we saw that against the Lions. You see that in his pursuit. But to me, that's not really who he is. He's not like a cornerstone piece that's going to settle down and just hold guys at the point of attack. That's not his style. Bringing this guy up when we were talking and doing that video, because on the little that I had watched at the time, I thought he popped much more to me than Harold Landry. Plus, when you looked at the Harold Landry financial situation, I just wasn't in love with it. Now, that doesn't mean he's a better player than Harold Landry. It's just kind of putting the two dynamics together. I'll actually just show the clips that I showed that when we were live. That way you can kind of have a sense of what this player can bring to the table. You see the closing speed. He had a 7.163 cone drill when he was coming out of the draft. He's got very plus length, but I think really opens up his finishing ability. And at very least, is to constantly get hands on the quarterback, right? In traffic, just find a way to get quarterback hits. He's very long in those spots. He is like the definition of kind of slippery between tackles, where he kind of just finds little creases and ways to get contact and ways to become a disruptor and flush guys out of the pocket. He's got maybe the best lateral burst that I've seen from any of these guys that I've watched to this point. He has a great ability to cover a lot of depth and just be very explosive in those spots. He plays with very nice body control, specifically in the lower body. Not only just stop and start, but you'll see it in kind of the setup as a pass rusher when he transitions downhill as a bull rusher, or when he's setting up kind of a move, you'll see the little ghost move here, pressing the offensive tackle, and then you get to that chop move with the skip step into it. He has very good body control where he's very smooth in those spots, and he can be very tricky to deal with. He has that footwork and kind of that pacing as a pass rusher that moves very light on his toes and kind of jump short sets and find a way to get inside. Easy change of direction. And probably one of my favorite parts is the entry angles, the entry point of attack as a run defender, also as a bull rusher, kind of the entry angles that he sets himself up to really create all the energy that he can into a knockback, into a walkback, into setting the edge. Again, there are limitations in the way that he's built. He definitely can stall out through reps. That's very much so on the table. And as good as that footwork footwork can be, there are times where it looks like he gets a little bit overpowered, or if kind of some of that finesse pass rush style doesn't work, he doesn't always have like a second gear to get to. When you look at a guy like Chaisson, he felt like he had a second gear as a pass rusher.
On a play like this, you'll see how well he uses length to keep space and keep himself off the offensive tackle. That being said, though, I don't think he's the most consistent finisher, and you'll see that as a run defender where he doesn't rack up a ton of tackles, where he can kind of get himself near the play, but he doesn't have that stack and shed to finish, or even in space sometimes where he can kind of close, but he doesn't always finish incredibly well.
I don't think the cost will be incredibly expensive. They've already moved off 2 guys, so they very, very much so could be willing to move off a guy like this that doesn't have this insane deal where it's like he's our guy, he's the cornerstone piece of our team, and he could also be in line to be a cap casualty after this season, after when you look at their financial situation. So it's very possible that for a very, little amount of return, this could be a player that the Lions could potentially acquire. So these are 2 guys that wouldn't really take probably a ton that you could potentially acquire. And if he plays well this year, you could have him back next season as kind of that like third down pass rush specialist type of role when the Lions are back and healthy, versus this year where he'd have to step in and be more of that consistent starter as he's kind of become this year. Massive upgrade over what the Lions have, but I do think that he gives us much more juice as a pass rusher, and he definitely gives us different style than what we currently have as a pass rusher. There's no doubt to me he'd help us there. As a run defender, I don't think you're getting a brick wall, right? You're not getting the most well-rounded player, but you definitely are getting more juice as a pass rusher in a different body type than what you currently have. So that's Arden Key. Those are 2 names that wouldn't cost a lot that I think are interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, but I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.